Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. All right, it's time for one of our favorite segments, Moot Court with former United States Attorney General Alberto Gonzales, who is now the dean of the Belmont University School of Law in scenic Tennessee, where all of Illinois is moving. Belmont, Amy.
Home of the Fighting
The Bruins.
Bruins, yes.
Belmont Bruins.
Belmont Bruins.
Right.
I know that, yes.
Okay. All right.
I've been reminded of it.
Attorney
Again.
General Gonzales, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
I'm happy to be with you again.
Every time we have you on, it allows me to extract some value from my law degree, so I appreciate it. But before we get to all the wiretapping and FISA court stuff, I wanted to get your opinion on something we've talked to you about before, which is Trump's executive order on immigration. We talked to you about the first iteration of it. He revised and reintroduced it this week, a little bit more explicit on some of the parts that were open to interpretation and thus confusion in the previous one. Iraq is substantially reduced as one of the countries of security concern, and Rex Tillerson explained why. What's your reaction to the revised edition of the executive order on this topic?
I think it's stronger. I think it's less likely it's going to be struck down by the courts, although honestly in this area, and I'm sad to say this, in this political climate, sometimes it's hard to predict how judges are going to come out on a particular issue. But I do think that it's difficult for the court to listen to the Secretary of State, Secretary of Homeland Security, and the Attorney General say, as a matter of national security, we need to have this ban in order to secure our country. What resources or what expertise does a federal judge have to second guess those claims by our national security experts? And so I think it really presents a hurdle to a judge to say, well, I know better. I don't believe you. I'm going to listen to the campaign comments made about banning Muslims from America. I just think that it's going to be tough for a judge to overlook the learned opinions of our national security experts. But again, I've been surprised before by courts and by judges, and we'll have to wait and see.
Well, do you think these judges are politically motivated? Is that why they're trying to stop this executive order?
No, I would never accuse a judge, both either federal or state, of being politically motivated. I do know that, judges are human beings, and try as we might, having been a former judge myself, sometimes you're affected by your own personal experiences and biases. You try to recognize that those exist and set them aside, be especially alert to those biases when deciding a case in which you might have a strong personal view about, but nonetheless, sometimes those creep into a decision. Again, I'm not suggesting that's going to happen in this case, but it's just hard to predict how judges will come out on an issue that's politically charged as this one.
So this week, in addition to that matter, there's, of course, the dueling allegations of surveillance, skullduggery. Everybody wants a special prosecutor to prosecute everyone else. It's like a Jerky Boys sketch. And so walk us through, as a former attorney general, walk us through kind of the protocol and the process of determining whether a special prosecutor is needed in a particular matter, whether it's with respect to relationships with foreign governments, as it continues to be alleged by Democrats about Trump and his associates, or whether it's with respect to questionable surveillance of a subject like, I don't know, a Republican presidential candidate?
Well, it's a pretty serious decision to be made by the Department of Justice, in part because we've had not a very successful history with special prosecutors in the past. And I think that both members of Congress and people in the executive branch are really somewhat wary of special prosecutors because oftentimes they spend a lot of money, and they often go into very tangential areas. They go off on a tangent and start exploring other activities and other events that happened beyond what they were first commissioned to do. So, I think the default position is there's not going to be a special prosecutor appointed. As a general matter, the question is whether or not the department believes that it has the confidence of the American people to do an investigation, because at the end of the day, it's really not about a particular person or a particular department doing the investigation. What is at issue here is the integrity of the investigation and the confidence that the American people will have in the integrity of that investigation. And so, people at the department will make an analysis, they'll reach a judgment as to whether or not, okay, not only do we have the resources, but we believe that we can do this in a way that the American people will have confidence in the outcome of our investigation, and our conclusion as to whether or not a crime has been committed, and our conclusion as to whether or not we have enough here to prosecute that crime. So again, it's a very difficult decision to be made. My view is the default position is going to be that a special prosecutor will not be appointed. But again, this is another situation where it's become extremely politicized and it's high profile. And at the end of the day, that may carry the day for the department, who may say, there's just so much at stake here. There's so little confidence this can be done impartially within the department, because it potentially could implicate, the White House, perhaps the Attorney General, who was obviously very high profile, very influential advisor during the campaign. But so we'll have to wait and see.
A former colleague of yours, also a former Attorney General of the United States under George W. Bush, Mike Mukasey, was on the Sunday talk shows this week, and he had an interesting perspective on this. He essentially said, "Look, I don't believe that the President of the United States ordered any surveillance of candidate Trump, but I believe that it's possible that surveillance occurred and it wasn't at the hands of the former president, the Justice Department, so on and so forth. Maybe incidental, maybe not. We don't know. The only way that we could really know is for the FISA applications that were apparently made in June and October of last year, and particularly the one that was apparently granted, according to news reports, to be made public. And that's not a good idea. It's not a good idea to make that public, even if it would answer these open-ended questions and end some of the speculation. Do you agree with Mukasey's assessment? And if so, why should or shouldn't those FISA warrants be made public?
Well, first of all, I don't think you'd have to go so far as to make the applications public. I mean, you could simply ask those individuals who would have been involved in that decision as to whether or not was there an application made and was there a warrant granted. Obviously, General Clapper has already publicly commented that no such thing occurred. Now, I understand second-hand, third-hand, fourth-hand, however you want to call it. The FBI director has also indicated that that didn't happen. Again, I'd like to hear it directly from the FBI director as opposed to unnamed sources.
Yeah,
I think that there is a danger with respect to releasing applications. It will, of course, include classified information, which can be redacted. But once you open the gate and you show an application publicly, it makes it much more difficult in the future whenever a third party who's been possibly subject to a wiretap under a FISA order and goes into court and says, I want to see it, I want it disclosed. And for the federal government to say, well, no, for national security reasons, we don't do that. We never do that. And so this opens the gate just a bit, and I think creates a problem for the national security of our country going forward. And for that reason, I don't think we have to go so far as to release the application. I think we can go to the people that would know, that would have been involved in the preparation of the application and going to the FISA court.
Yeah, but here's the problem. And it goes back to what you said about the investigation and in our conversation about special prosecutor. If you don't have the confidence of the American people, if you're not seen as legitimate or at least an honest broker, then your word turns out not to be the end of the discussion on the matter. And unfortunately, I think that's the case right now with Jim Comey and others, particularly in the deep state or formerly of the deep state.
Well, if we've gotten to that point, I think we've got a lot more serious problems than this particular issue and the question as to whether or not to release a FISA application. I don't think we've gotten that. I don't think we've gotten there. At least I certainly hope not. Again, I do think it's really just a question of simply asking the right people and having the people provide the answer. I think President Trump, I agree with General McCasey that I don't think that President Obama simply ordered a wiretap of individuals at Trump Tower. I think it's certainly possible. I'm not suggesting that this is in reality, but it's certainly possible that there was an ongoing investigation of Russian influence over the election. And obviously, if there were communications between Russian officials and officials in the Trump campaign, and there may have been innocent communications, but nonetheless, communications may have been captured in connection with that investigation, which the authority to engage in that surveillance may have been through a validly issued FISA warrant. I think that's far more likely to have been the case than simply President Obama saying, go ahead and tap all the phones, including Donald Trump in Trump Tower.
Well, where does this alleged wiretapping story, where does it go from here? I mean, President Trump hasn't tweeted about it since he did over the weekend, and what happens now?
Well, I understand that Senators Lindsey Graham and Sheldon Whitehouse have now asked the Department of Justice and the FBI for all information, documentation relating to possible wiretapping, and I suspect it will have asked for the FISA, any documentation relating to the application and the warrant itself, and they may get it, they may not, assuming I don't know what's there to get, but so Donald Trump and the White House has asked for a congressional investigation, and that's what's going to happen, and so we'll see what happens.
He is Alberto Gonzales, former United States Attorney General under President George W. Bush, as well as former counsel to the president, now the dean of the Belmont University School of Law. General Gonzales, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.